Okay, today we're going to be learning about factoring. And factoring is what you do when you have a quadratic and you need to break it down in order to find the solutions of the quadratic. You should be familiar with what a quadratic is. We've done a few examples in each chapter. Let's take a look at this one. Here we have a quadratic. A quadratic is something that has a variable to the second power. So here we have x squared minus 3x minus 10 equals 0. And in order to solve for x here, there's no way that you could do it by just pulling out a common variable and solving for x. So we would need to factor. Okay, so to begin factoring, we always look at the last number and the middle number. So this last number is a negative 10. The middle number here is a negative 3. So we have to think of two numbers that when you multiply them equals negative 10. But those same two numbers, when you add them, have to equal negative 3. So here's where you kind of guess and check and you start working through. We know that the only two numbers that multiply to be negative 10, or let's just say positive 10, is 2 and 5. So now we have to figure out which one of these has to be negative in order for them to add up to be negative 3. Well, if I make the 2 negative, then we're going to get a positive 3. So we're going to have to make the 5 negative. Negative 5 plus 2 is negative 3. Negative 5 times 2 is negative 10. So when we finish our final answer, we write these numbers in. This is a positive 2, and this is a negative 5. And we write is equal to 0. Now, if you want to check to see if you've done this correct, go ahead and FOIL, and then you should end up with this answer right up here. Alright, we're not quite done here. We've factored these already, so now we have to find the solution. We have to solve for x. Now, we know that this right here is equal to 0. We want to know when will this equal 0? And the reason we want that is because if this equals 0, 0 times x minus 5 makes this whole thing 0. But then this also can be 0, so we also want to know when that can be 0. So we can have 0 times x plus 2. Both of these will equal 0. So we need to go ahead and solve that. So let's go ahead and get rid of this real quick, and then we'll solve for this. When will this parentheses here equal 0? Well, that'll be when x equals negative 2. When will this equal 0? Well, that will be when x minus 5 equals 0, and that's when x equals positive 5. So these are your solutions. X equals negative 2, and x equals 5. Alright, let's go ahead and try this example over here. Notice in this example, it does not equal 0. Before you can factor, you've always got to have one side equal to 0. So we need to move the 48 to the left side. Now the 48 is positive, so we're going to start off by subtracting 48 to both sides. And I have x squared minus 2x minus 48 is equal to 0. Now we can go ahead and factor. So let's go ahead and find two numbers that when you multiply them equals negative 48. But those same two numbers add up to be negative 2. Two numbers that multiply to be 48 are 6 and 8. Now we have to figure out which one has to be negative and which one has to be positive. We want it to add up to be negative 2. The only way for that to work is if the 8 is a negative. 6 plus a negative 8 is negative 2. 6 times a negative 8 is negative 48. So we can now write them inside the parentheses. X plus 6 and x minus 8 is equal to 0. Okay, so in order to find the solution, we have to make each one of these equal to 0 and find what x has to be. So in order for this to be 0, x would have to be negative 6. And in order for this set of parentheses to equal 0, x would have to be 8. And those are our solutions. Example 2. Let's go ahead and solve for this one. Now here it doesn't have the equal 0, so we're just going to put the equals to 0, and we're going to go ahead and factor this. So once again, in order to factor, we need two numbers that when you multiply them is equal to the last number, but those same two numbers add up to be the middle term. So in this case, 3 times 2 is the only thing that will add up to be 5. So our final answer, our final factoring, is x plus 3 and x plus 2. So our solutions would be x equals negative 3 and x equals negative 2. And then we're done. Let's go ahead and have you guys try one. Go ahead and write this problem down. Bring it to class. Make sure you box your answers so we can check these off quickly as we pass by. Alright, we're going to go ahead and learn how to use the quadratic formula. So this right here is a quadratic formula. Make sure you write this down in your notes so that you can have it and you can use it when you do the worksheets tomorrow. So in this quadratic formula, I'm going to go ahead here and write the standard form for a quadratic, and we can learn what each of these letters represents. Once you have your equation equal to 0, a is always the number next to the x squared, b is the number next to the variable x, and c is the constant, which has no variable. So all you need to do is identify those and then plug them into the equation. Let's go ahead and do a problem like this. So here we have a problem where we're going to have to use the quadratic formula. Now the reason we have to use quadratic formula instead of factoring like we have been doing in the previous examples is because you can no longer just take two numbers that multiply to be this number and add up to be this number, because a is not equal to 1, meaning this number right here is keeping you from doing that. As long as this is a 1, you can factor like we did on the first three examples. But as soon as this is no longer a 1, and if it's a positive number or a negative number that's not 1, you're going to have to use the quadratic formula. And later when you go to Algebra 2, you will learn how to factor without using the quadratic formula if a is not 1. But for geometry, we're just going to use the quadratic formula. In this case, a is positive 2, b is a negative 22. You've got to be very careful. That negative sign belongs to the 22. And c is a positive 48. So I'm going to go ahead and write here the quadratic formula, and then we're going to fill it in. Alright, so let's go ahead and fill these in. Here we have a negative b, so we have to plug in b. Now you've got to be careful. You've got to put a negative. And if b happens to be negative, you've got to put that negative in there as well. So notice here these two negatives will cancel. If we keep going, we have a plus and a minus, and we'll explain what that means in a minute. We take the square root of b squared, so negative 22 squared, minus 4 times a times c. A is 2, c is 48. So we're going to take all of this and we're going to divide it by 2 times a. So a is 2, so 2 times 2. So let's go ahead and work this through. Here we have a negative and a negative 22. So this turns into a positive 22, plus or minus. So square root, we have 22 squared, which is 484, minus 4 times 2 times 8 is 64. So we're going to take all of this and divide it by 2 times 2, which is 4. So let's simplify the square root. So I'm going to go ahead and move up here so we have more room. So we have 22 plus or minus. So in our square root, we have 484 minus 64, which is 420. We're still dividing by 4. So now let's go ahead and break down our square root. The square root of 420 is 20.49, and that's just rounded. And we're going to take this and divide this by 4. Now here's where we use the plus and minus. What the plus and minus means is that you have two solutions. The first solution will use the plus sign, so that'll be 22 plus 20.49 divided by 4. The second solution will use the subtraction sign, so 22 minus 20.49 divided by 4. So once you have those, that will be your final solution for x. So let's go ahead and plug each of these in the calculator. If I do 22 plus 20.49 divided by 4, we get 10.62. If we do 22 minus 20.49 divided by 4, we get that is 0.38 if we round up. So here are our two solutions. So do you see how we could not have factored this over here? There's no way we would have been able to come up with these numbers to see that they add up to be the middle number because of this 2. So let's go ahead and try another one like this one. So once again, here a is not 1. And take a look at your equation. This does not equal 0. So we're going to have to move things around in order for this to equal 0. So in order for us to do that, we're going to have to add 6x to both sides. And we're going to have to subtract 24 as well. So now we have 3x squared plus 6x minus 24 is equal to 0. So a is 3, and I'll write these off to the side. B is 6, and C is negative 24. So let's plug these in. Our quadratic equation says negative b is 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 6 squared, minus 4 times a is 3, times c is negative 24. All divided by 2 times a, and a is 3. Alright, so let's go ahead and simplify everything here. On the top we have a negative 6. There's no other negative to cancel with that. In our square root, 6 times 6 is 36. And here we have 4 times 3 times a negative 24, which is a negative 288. Now that negative and the minus sign will cancel, so this will be a positive 288. On the bottom we have 2 times 3, which is 6. Okay, so let's simplify that even further. In our square root, 36 plus 288 is 324. Okay, so on this one, now we have negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 324 is 18, so that is a perfect square. And then we divide this by 6. So right here you can choose to break it up into your two equations, your one with a positive and one with a negative. Or you can notice that these have a common multiple, so I'm going to go ahead and simplify this one more time. I know that 6 is a common multiple of all of these. 6 goes into itself once, goes into this one once, and this one 3 times. So now I have 1 plus or minus 3 over 1, but I'm not going to write the over 1. So now I'm going to break this up into my two equations. I have 1 plus 3 and 1 minus 3. 1 plus 3 is 4. 1 minus 3 is a negative 2. So these are my solutions, 4 and negative 2. Alright, now it's your turn. Go ahead and solve this problem using the quadratic formula. Go ahead and show your work as well. Don't just write a final answer. And then box your answers so we can check these quickly tomorrow when you do your worksheets.